Bueno, buenos días a todo el mundo. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Es un gusto para Fitch realizar este desayuno. Un poco tarde para desayunar, pero bienvenido sea. Y queremos entonces aprovechar e introducir a las personas que van a ser los presentadores y oradores en esta jornada. Tengo al señor Dan Cashon, que es la cabeza del grupo de análisis corporativo, de ratings corporativo de las Américas. Tiene una vasta experiencia, muy conocedor de la Argentina y de los emisores argentinos durante décadas. Tengo en el centro a la moderadora, que es la señora Kathleen Holzman, que tiene a su cargo el desarrollo de negocios para América Latina, con cabeza en Nueva York, y probablemente muchos de ustedes conocen a Cecilia Minguillón, que es la directora senior encargada de todo el área de ratings corporativos de Fitch acá en Buenos Aires. Así que sin más, le paso la palabra a Kathleen. Les anticipo que, como lo indicáramos en la invitación, la parte de Dan va a ser dada en inglés. Kathleen?
Thanks very much, Douglas, and thanks to my colleagues at Fitch for organizing this event, at Fix for organizing this event for Fitch and Fix. So in terms of format, we're going to start with a presentation from Dan, move to that will cover Latin America, move then to a presentation from Cecilia. She'll cover Argentina, and after that we'll take Q&A.
Thank you. Should I sit down or stand up? I'll stand. Hello everyone, good morning, buenos dias. Right on the star here. I think I'm going to turn my timer on because for any of you that know me, I like to talk. Let's see if I can get the timer here for me. All right. So, buenos dias. My name is, as Douglas mentioned, my name is Dan Castholm. I've been with Fitch 25 years. All of that time in Latin America. So, despite my great Spanish here, I have actually been living and breathing what you guys have been living and breathing for many, many years, although from Chicago, Illinois. Fitch has a very big presence in Latin America. We started in the early 90s after the lost decade. Some of our first ratings were actually here in Argentina. 1995 was, I think, when some of the first international transactions occurred. I think the first one could have been TGN, which was the gas pipeline, and then we had a lot of investment in gas Andes, and then the Trans Andes, and so a lot of investment. So I've been coming down for quite a while, and Buenos Aires seems, despite the years, seems very familiar. And very similar to what it was back then. Today, I am going to talk a little bit about just the region. We'll start with the region, and then we'll transition it to Cecilia. I'll also touch on the major countries, but start a little bit with the growth. So, is there a... Thank you. So how do I use this? Okay, so I will look at this. Let's look globally, and when we look at the region, there is definitely no shortage of challenges. I think we all know that. We have very strong global economy. We have weakening Latin American sovereigns. We have rising funding costs. We've seen outflows from the emerging markets into the developed markets as rates are starting to rise. We've seen a lot of populism and rhetoric that is concerning for the various markets. But what we've seen for the Latin American corporates in general is it's been fairly a mixed bag. We have improving cash flow, free cash flow, which is one of the most important metrics that we look at, lower investment activity, leverage reasonably has stayed fairly stable and actually improved in some cases as companies have retrenched in this period of economic weakness throughout the region. You have manageable debt profiles, but you also have declining market access. So starting from the top, some of you may have been here earlier with Richard, sort of gave you that overview. But when you look at the world growth, we have shaved the numbers down a little bit, but it's very strongly performing. We're seeing growth rates of about 3.3%, 3.1% next year. And most of it's being driven by the US, the Eurozone, and China. They're growing very strongly, and the US market in particular is extremely hot. And this is being driven by the corporate tax rate and personal tax cuts that were put in place by President Trump. So you went from a corporate tax rate of 35% down to 21%. Some companies took that's a huge reduction in corporate taxes. Many companies even use that to pay employees one-time bonuses, which put more money in their pocket. Personal tax rates have gone down. So the economy is 70% consumer, and it's growing. First quarter was roughly 2.2%. Fourth quarter was 4.2%. I think they're expecting another 4.1%. So when you look at the U.S. economy, it's growing, could grow as quickly as 3.5%. And the U.S. economy makes up about 25% of the global economy. And then if you include the Eurozone and China, you're probably about 60% of the global economy. So the global economy and the developed markets are really moving the ball along. But it's a different story in Latin America. When you look at, and I would go down to the very bottom line, we're expecting growth of about 2.5%, 2.7% next year, which for developing markets is extremely low. So if you look at, as a result of this very slow growth, if you look to the right-hand chart, you see virtually in every country across the region, debt has been increasing dramatically over the last, since 2010. And if you look at Brazil and Argentina, you're with the most recent, if you were to adjust this chart for the most recent exchange rates in Argentina, both Brazil and Argentina are close to 80%. So dramatic increases in debt. And the big issue throughout the region is the deficits. Basically, taking in and spending more. So your fiscal deficits are large, particularly in Brazil, roughly 8%, 8 to 10%, and in Argentina, 6%. Also, we have the Fed tightening. We've seen a few interest rate hikes this year. We're still at very low interest rates, but what we're seeing is rates that are starting to move up, which makes the U.S. more attractive, which strengthens the dollar and is going to put upward pressure on the local rates throughout, excluding Argentina. I'm not sure if Argentina's rates are going to go any higher than they already are. They're quite high. But for other markets, such as Brazil, that's coming out of a 100-year recession, their rates have come down substantially. But those things could be under pressure now with the U.S. rates going up and the dollar strengthening, particularly with the strong U.S. economy. So not surprisingly, we've had the majority of our sovereign actions have been negative. Argentina, we had put a positive on in November 2017. In May, after the rapid deterioration in the peso and the IMF announcement, we removed that to stable, so from positive to stable. Brazil has been downgraded from investment grade over the last 2.5 times, I think 2.5 years. Roughly, we've had, I think, three to four downgrades over that period of time, reflecting just a very large economic deterioration. Positive actions are few, but they really don't move the needle. Jamaica, tsunami, aren't going to move the needle for positive actions. Also, we have weak appetite for bond issuances. Here you can see this is non-financials, non-sovereigns. So this is corporates, the non-financial corporates. And you can see that we peaked at close to 80 billion in cross-border issuances. So there was a lot of appetite in the market for issuers. This year we're at about 31 billion, and all of that was done up through May. So the summer was, our summer, your winter, was very, very light for issuances. There weren't many transactions, if any, that occurred. And a lot of it was because the outflows coming in the contagion to the emerging markets, Turkey, Argentina. So we saw outflows to the emerging markets and also returns. When you look at year-to-date returns, you have the U.S. stock market up 7%, and the MSCI Emerging Market Index down about 13%. So you have about a 20% gap. So investors are saying, where can I make money? And they're saying emerging markets is a challenged place. So money's going out. So that has really dampened availability and access to the markets. The good news is debt amortizations are very manageable. If you look in 2019, let's see if this pointer works. Oh, it does. Can you see there? We have 11 issuers that represent 11 billion. So if in a tough market like today, you can do 31 billion. And there are a few transactions that just got done. Last week, I believe, Millicom bought a cable company in Panama and was able to price 500 million. You have a Mexican manufacturer, a borderline investment grade, going to market for roughly 400 million. So some of these transactions are actually getting done, and there is some opening, but it's not overly robust. But even if you were able to do that, in this number here, about half of it's two companies. 4.5 billion between Pemex, which is a BBB plus credit, and then you also have América Móvil, which is a Mexican telecom company, Claro, which is in every market in Latin America. So a good portion of that, we don't have any real issues with someone facing a refinancing wall. In terms of the three high yield names, you have some Petrobras in there, which we think will be financeable. The only one that we really have concern with would potentially be CSN, which is a steel company, an iron ore producer in Brazil. So, and they have a $500 million deal, and they're under a lot of pressure. Let's go on. So there's been a lot of noise regarding trade. I think everybody is aware. Does everybody hear it down here in Argentina? The U.S. and China, does it get reported? Mexico and the U.S. So it is global news, and there's a lot of saber rattling, a lot of threats back and forth, and with the Germans as well. So, and a lot of it comes from Washington, D.C. The good news, I think, for Latin America is your economies are still closed, very closed economies in general, which insulates you to a certain extent from some of these potential trade wars. Looking a little closer at it, if you look at export composition, every country is quite a bit different on how they react and what they're exposed to. So, oops, let's see here. So here, just looking, Colombia and Venezuela, oil dominated. So both of them, to a certain extent, Colombia should benefit by higher oil prices. Venezuela has its own issue with trade sanctions and declining production. So there's a humanitarian crisis. So oil, I don't think prices are gonna really help there. Chile and Peru, very much centered on the mining business, copper in Chile. We anticipate there to be a shortage of copper by 2021, which is going to result in higher prices over that period of time for the next few years. So that shortage of copper is going to support prices. It is going to be quite good for Chile and Peru. If you go to Mexico, it's very dependent on the U.S. It's delinked from the rest of South America. How goes the U.S., how goes Mexico? The new trade agreement is a really, really good thing. It's not only good, the Mexicans who really disliked President Trump are now singing his praises. They love the fact that this deal got done. It is really good for North America. And what the big changes were, it was designed to improve manufacturing. So manufacturing, the big change, and then the people on the left in the U.S. are basically saying, oh, it's just an update. It's not a radical change. That's what we said was going to happen. Fitch came out 2 years ago when, oh, he's going to scrap NAFTA. It's going to result supply chains. No, it's not. They're going to update it. They're going to include, digital commerce. They're going to include a few other things. They're going to tweak it. He's got to get some wins. It's very union-driven and very, the anti-trade, the free trade is more of a Democrat item and union item, and the free traders are more from Trump's party. So for him, he was straddling the fence, so he heard a lot more criticism on ripping up NAFTA from his own party. By doing this deal, they raised the content of automotives, the content. So it's a content rule that has to be increased from North America, so Canada, the US, and Mexico. It goes from 62.5% to 75%. And it also requires 40% of the labor earns $16 an hour. Now in Mexico, if there's a company that we know, their average cost per day is $2 an hour, per hour, $2. So they're quite a bit different, the wage rates. But those requirements are very good for Trump from the perspective, and if you really want to say, why does it help him getting this done, even though it really doesn't radically change the mix by going from 62 to 75, if you looked at automobile manufacturers in the US, they already pay 40% of the content is by labor that gets $16. Already the US manufacturers have 75% of their content in North America. So for the US automobile manufacturers, it really doesn't change anything. What it does will allow pressure to be put on the Germans and the Japanese, who the vast majority of the automobile is outside of the US and outside of North America. So what that could mean, and you've already seen announcements by the German automobile manufacturers, which sell a lot of cars in the US, to start moving some of their investment to Mexico for engines, for powertrains, which represent about 30% of the value of a car. Politically, what this does for Trump is basically there are 4 states that really matter in the US. They vote Democrat every year. That would be Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I would like to say Ohio, but that flips either way all the time. So those are traditionally Democrat states, highly unionized states. By doing that $16 per hour, he actually has appeased a lot of those union workers where he upset Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that deal doesn't dramatically alter, but the political landscape. It gives him political power. It doesn't materially rewrite it. He didn't rip it up. It's not radically different. But everyone's breathing a sigh of relief, particularly in Mexico. So that's a lot on NAFTA, but I thought everybody would be a little interested in that. So what does this mean for our corporate ratings in general? We've had a tough time. I think for anyone that was in the room with Richard, he just showed those upgrade downgrades over the, he said basically globally corporates were flat but trending downward. And then if you looked at the emerging market, it was a lot more dramatic decline in ratings. So that started, so we started downgrading companies in 2013, second half. And a lot of it was related to Brazil, and at multiple times, and we had a very large shift in our portfolio from more of a normal standard distribution shape to more skewed negatively. So I think we've got I think we've sort of hit bottom with our ratings. We have sort of stabilized the portfolio. I think we had roughly 30 to 40, 2 years ago, 30 to 40% of our entire portfolio was on, let's see, I'll do a little time check here. Because I only have 300 more slides to go. So it was about 30% were on the negative, and now we're almost balanced. So we've had a lot of downturn due to the slow environment, economic environments here in sovereign downgrades, but I think the portfolio was stable. So I think we have our ratings right. I mentioned free cash flow. I think the company's reacted very well to this period of decelerating growth. You saw cash flow. This is basically free cash flow to revenue ratio. You had negative free cash flow in 2013, and what companies did across the category, with the exception of the A's, which always have positive free cash flow, you had them cut back on CapEx, cost savings, reduce expenses, and really tighten the belt. And the B's, I think, is probably the most notable, where they've actually become cash flow break even because they really have not had the access to financing. So it's been a requirement that they really tighten in their spending. I like this chart as well, but this further demonstrates the expectations of CFOs and CEOs. The big decision when it comes to CapEx is, what do you expect in the future for growth? And do I spend the exact amount of my depreciation, which is basically replacing existing assets to maintain my cash flow, or do I invest above my depreciation so I actually will have additional capacity to fund the growth and to meet the demand for future growth? And this shows over that period of time that there really hasn't been a positive view on growth, and CEOs in that have cut back on CapEx. Leverage, I would say by category is appropriate, by rating level. It's been fairly steady. You haven't seen too much increase in the levels of leverage and are appropriate for the rating category. By country, I think Cecilia is going to have a different number here because her portfolio is different than ours. But within our portfolio of names, leverage is fairly modest by country as well, with the exception of maybe Chile, which tends to be a little bit higher because there was significant, over this period of time, a lot of the Chilean companies would make acquisitions outside of the market, and these really didn't pan out as well as they thought they would, so that you have a little more elevation in leverage in Chile for some of these companies. All right, maybe let's go around the horn by country. So, Argentina. I don't think it's going to get too much easier. Everybody, you guys probably know better than I, the IMF, they increased the package. You're going to get $19 billion of funding over the next year through MACRI's up through the election. So somebody was asking, do you think you're going to default? And I would say, well, in 2019, I don't think so. I mean, you're still at a very high risk point with the devaluation, rates where they are, a lot of cutbacks. But the key thing in the IMF package is to go from this 2.6 to 0. And where does it come from? Well, eliminate subsidies. So it's spending. It's all spending. It's not tax. So no one's going to tax you more. What they're going to do is they're going to take away the subsidies, which is an indirect tax. I mean, when you take it back, people say, oh, it's coming out of my pocket because I have to pay more for services and transportation and energy. So that's the one spot, very unpopular. And the other one is infrastructure in CapEx. So they're going to pull back on infrastructure. And when you look at it, I think they're going to reduce it to like less than 1% per GDP from a historical of 2.2. So that's a dramatic cut. And going into election period, that's going to be very difficult. So it's not going to be easy over the next year or so. Let's see here, Brazil. Okay, somebody had asked a question about Brazil. I think it was you. And I'll start out by saying, wow. Bolsonaro, 2 weeks before the election, 28% popularity, wins 46% within 2 weeks. So all the undecideds went with him. Everybody thought he was going to lose in a second round runoff to Haddad or to Gomez. So it looks like, and despite some of the negative things said about women, they're voting for him. So it looks like a positive thing from a fiscal perspective could be developing. I mean, Morales probably will shift. He'll probably pick up votes. But the big thing in that election was out of 32 senators that were up for re-election, 24 of them lost. So it says two things. It says, we don't want the existing politicians there, and we want you to fight crime. So, strong message. I would say that with the diminished influence of Lula's and the PT in Brazil, there is a ray of hope for pension reform. The biggest issue facing Brazil right now is pension reform, and you hear it all the time. But to give you some numbers, 56% of their spending is on Social Security and pensions. And it's growing by 4% greater than inflation. It's not good. So that big deficit, that's all pensions. They need to reform it. So if Bolsonaro gets it, and there is the other coalitions, which are more center-right, will team with them, they could potentially make the tough choices and help Brazil out fiscally. That's really what needs to get done, and that's what Fitch is really watching. So we'll pay attention for the end of the month to see what the ultimate happens. But with Bolsonaro, there's also risks. He's fairly right, and he has called for potential military rule, which I don't think anybody that is a capitalist and believes in democracy would think that's a good thing. So we'll see how far it goes, if he's successful in fighting crime, and if he can really reform that government, but also to see if there are going to be checks and balances on that power, so they can at least correct their fiscal imbalances. Chile, definitely a slow growth scenario. I think there's a lot of headwinds ahead, but I think the copper prices are going to help the economy. They're growing about 2%. I think Piñera is saying up to 4% growth. He wants tax reform, education reform. I think it's going to be challenging, but he may get some benefit with this. You know, what we are forecasting is a copper shortage, which is going to bolster prices and help that economy. Colombia, this one is now or never. And what we mean by that is there's a couple things. That was a very interesting election. It's sort of fun to talk about it, you know, the elections post-election. So we were in a big, obviously, election cycle here, and still are with Brazil. But what I thought was very interesting and what to take away, he had Duque beat Petro. And Petro was a guerrilla, former guerrilla, mayor of, and Duque won 54% to 42%. Wow. That's a wow material as well. It says you have some polarization in that country and some unsatisfied people to be voting for a former guerrilla and a very left candidate, which has traditionally been a very more conservative economy and government. So I think that it says something. Now Duque really has to rev up the growth, and he's got the wind behind him. He's got high oil prices. He's got support in Congress. So those two factors alone, he has to get some stuff done in terms of tax reforms, etc. So we'll see. I think he has an 18 to 24 month window to get that done. To the extent he does, that can rev up the growth again in Colombia. Mexico. I said a lot about it. Mexico has been the very boring 2% growth, low inflation, very tied to the U.S., which is, you know, bumped along for quite a while. Our portfolio there is very international, with a lot of operations in the U.S., so very integrated with the U.S. So it's very tied to the U.S. I think the NAFTA is very positive for Mexico, because it really doesn't undo anything. So I think that's positive. The big issue here is AMLO. AMLO had campaigned on more of a protectionist, you know, we're not going to be beholden to the U.S. Yet I understand that he had individuals. Now they want to sign that. They had this October deadline for that trade agreement, October 1st, because there has to be a 60-day notice period in the U.S. and they want the former president to sign it, even though AMLO has stated his support and the transition team was involved. So he just didn't want to be the guy to sign it. So they're going to sign it, they're going to support it, and hopefully be able to get it through their Congress. So it looks like there's support there. All the rhetoric that he's had as well, I'm going to build 12,000 or 2 refineries that cost $12 billion, which, well, who's going to do that? Pemex can't afford to do that. They don't have the cash to do it. So he said, you know, I'm going to cancel the airport expansion. So there's a few things that are very concerning, that he would not fulfill contracts. He's backed off on some of those things, or undoing the energy reforms. He's basically pedaled back on that, but he does have this constituents that he does have to satisfy. So how he does that politically is still going to be a challenge. And do we have, Peru. This is another good one. It's like a telenovela. Do you have those? You guys have those here? I thought that was just in Mexico, but they're everywhere. The soap opera. And I don't know if it was, but you have the Popular Force. So Kiko and her brother and the Fujimoris, their party very strong in, they're more on the right side, but very strong in Peru. Control the Congress. Were able to successfully call a no confidence vote for PPK. But I don't know if he did this to try to preserve his job, or he knew what was going to happen. But by giving the granting asylum or a pardon to the father, Fujimori, their popularity has declined dramatically. So as a result of that, Vizcarra is sort of taking advantage because you had the Supreme Court judge that was videoed taking a bribe. So he basically said to the party, to the Congress, take a second no contest vote. So try to kick me out. I want you to kick me out. Because if you do, that automatically triggers a general election for everybody. And all these politicians don't want, because there's such discontent, to go to the polls again. And he said, if you don't do that, let's take a referendum that talks about reforming, it's reforming campaign finance, it's reforming, creating a bicameral Congress, it's total reform throughout that country. So it's coming up in December, and it's, I think politically it was very strategic, because whatever the outcome is, I think it's positive. And Peru, despite all of this, continues to grow at 3.5%, 4%. Has been the only one that the debt hasn't really gone up over the last, since 2010, very stable. They just have all this political squabbling. So I think the overall message there would be this could create some additional reforms in Peru, which would be good for the corporates. I think within Peru, though, the portfolio is dominated by the miners, and the government, whatever government it has been from Humala, has always been understood that, and always has been reasonable, no matter whether you're the left or the right in Peru, to have reasonable take in terms of royalties, et cetera, on the mining sector, because it's so important for that economy. So, so what are the conclusions here? Well, that's our disclaimer. So we don't want you to read that. Let's see here. Oh, so that's London. They don't include Chicago on there. No. So real quickly, just what are your takeaways? The global economy has I think a lot of steam, and is growing very quickly. I think Richard pointed out a few of the issues, and it's basically pulling back QE, the quantitative easing globally, and what's that going to do to the euro and the U.S. with potentially higher rates, but they're still very low. Latin America has struggled, so we've been there, and it's been tough for the last several years. I think we hit bottom, and I think we're starting to come out, but you have, we're getting behind these election cycles. There's some returning liquidity, not a ton, but I think that, the real key in the big markets such as Argentina, let's see what happens over the next year or so. I think we're not forecasting a default in 2019, which I think is a positive thing. Thank you for the IMF. I think you're covered for this year. Hopefully this, somebody don't laugh so hard. And then I think with Brazil, they really do need reform, and it seems like the people are talking and speaking up through their votes. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see if the winner, whoever that may be, actually does not try to kick the can down the road and actually reform it. And then I think that's it. I can open it up for a question. And we can wake everybody up.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I think before, Before we open for questions, let's have Cecilia come up and drill down a little in Argentina.
Bueno, mucho gusto. Yo les voy a comentar un poco, nos vamos a referir básicamente al portafolio de calificaciones nacionales y un poco queremos contar qué es lo que estuvimos haciendo en este último año, qué están reflejando las calificaciones, dónde estamos y hacia dónde creemos que vamos con las calificaciones. Básicamente, digamos, en el último año tenemos la curva de distribución de las calificaciones del portafolio de calificaciones nacionales, un corrimiento hacia el lado derecho con calificaciones mayormente en las A, en las triple B, corriéndose hacia niveles inferiores. Podemos ver en el segundo gráfico de la derecha, en las perspectivas, en 2017 la perspectiva era dominantemente estable, con cerca de un 90%, 89% de perspectiva estable, mientras que en el 2018, si bien continúa predominando una perspectiva estable, la perspectiva negativa subió al 30%. La actividad, obviamente, de calificaciones fue básicamente de bajas netas, hubo en total 14 bajas. Los sectores que dominaron las bajas fueron los sectores de consumo masivo y de retail, y también hubo compañías en el sector de electricidad que fueron bajadas de calificación. El escenario en el corto plazo es de una muy alta incertidumbre. Domina la perspectiva estable, pero entendemos que ahí hay un trabajo compañía por compañía y ver hacia dónde, qué es lo que sucede en el próximo año. ¿Cómo es que llegamos a esta? ¿Qué es lo que explica básicamente la actividad de las calificaciones en el último año? Fue básicamente un shock macroeconómico donde no solo la magnitud, sino la rapidez de los movimientos hicieron que lo que las compañías argentinas están acostumbradas a tener mucha flexibilidad y manejo de crisis, en muy poco tiempo el cambio de entorno hizo que acotara un poco los márgenes de maniobra, ¿no? Fueron 4 meses, desde abril hasta septiembre, básicamente donde el deterioro y la volatilidad fue bastante alta. Podemos ver cómo partimos a principios del 2018 y dónde estamos hoy, cuáles son las expectativas hacia adelante. O sea, partimos un 2018 con básicamente las reformas energéticas hechas, las compañías de electricidad muy bien posicionadas en términos de planes de expansión y digamos, han tomado deuda para llevar a cabo esos planes de expansión. Muchos sectores como sectores de la construcción, donde venían creciendo a tasas muy altas, también tenían planes y avisoraban unas perspectivas muy buenas. Todo eso rápidamente cambió con un shock de confianza al consumidor, hiriendo de nuevo el sentimiento de los inversores, como hablaba Richard y Dan anteriormente, y hoy por hoy esperamos casi el doble de casi todas las variables críticas, como son inflación, tipo de cambio y la tasa de política monetaria, que ya también nos quedó desactualizada al 60%, lamentablemente. Creemos que obviamente esto es una coyuntura de muy corto plazo, y esperamos que esto se normalice en los próximos meses. De todas maneras, fue un shock, ya vuelvo a repetir, muy fuerte y en muy poco tiempo. ¿Cómo fueron los movimientos en los distintos sectores en este último tiempo? Sectores que básicamente se encontraban en etapa de expansión, están de alguna manera girando en el sentido de las agujas del reloj hacia una fuerte desaceleración, en algunos casos ya decreciendo. Los sectores más relacionados con todo lo que tiene reformas energéticas, subsidios, etc., se preparaban para lograr una autosuficiencia. Eso hoy no está en duda, digamos, pero el riesgo regulatorio continúa siendo un riesgo muy importante porque de alguna manera, digamos, las cuentas fiscales hacen más vulnerable y ponen en duda si realmente se va a poder continuar con los esquemas de aumentos que se estaban previendo. El sector de construcción, por ejemplo, que venía creciendo a tasas muy altas y que en vez de crecer vía, digamos, el sistema tradicional de oferta pública, de obra pública, iba a crecer a través del programa de participación público-privada. También hoy cuenta con una fuerte limitante que es la disponibilidad de liquidez. Y bueno, la industria del comercio, que por razones de oferta, digamos, de competitividad en algunos casos o de falta de consumo y problemas de demanda, también están digamos, decreciendo y no se sabe, en los próximos meses creemos que va a seguir sufriendo 2 o 3 trimestres más. Es un problema básicamente de liquidez y el riesgo más fuerte es de refinanciación, pero si miramos un poco los niveles de apalancamiento, también separando los distintos sectores, podemos encontrar que podría llegar a haber algún problema de solvencia. Los niveles de endeudamiento se duplicaron en los últimos años. Esto tiene que ver, obviamente, con la preparación hacia planes de expansión, porque, como les dije anteriormente, fines del 2017, principios del 2018, había una perspectiva muy buena en muchos sectores, todos estaban preparando para crecer y habían hecho los deberes en los mercados internacionales también, con emisiones de montos muy importantes. Y esto rápidamente hoy los encuentra con una posición de deuda más importante de lo que desearan. Existen casos, obviamente, como los utilities o el sector eléctrico, donde digamos, los vencimientos no son en los próximos 2 años, con lo cual pueden sufrir temporalmente un riesgo de descalce de moneda, pero los fundamentals siguen siendo fuertes hoy. Existen otros sectores, obviamente, donde el deterioro y la sensibilidad a estas tasas de interés, sectores que básicamente se enfrentan al mercado doméstico y tienen deuda en pesos, esos sectores hoy están corriendo nuevos escenarios con una tasa de interés que la tienen que renovar en el corto plazo y claramente las coberturas están sufriendo. Ya han sufrido bastante. Y creemos que en el próximo trimestre van a continuar sufriendo. Si vemos los niveles de apalancamiento a través de las medianas en las distintas categorías, no hay mucha diferencia en las categorías más altas. Lo que sucede es que ahí la diferenciación es por composición de deuda. Las compañías con niveles de apalancamiento quizás similares a las compañías AAA o AA, que comparan contra niveles de endeudamiento similares a las A o las BBB, la fuerte diferencia tiene que ver con los plazos y con la composición de la deuda, donde una es una deuda en dólares a varios años hacia adelante, mientras que otra es deuda en pesos, que se está actualizando a las tasas actuales con vencimientos mucho más cortos. Y obviamente la sensibilidad que tienen esas compañías a las coberturas de intereses es mucho más fuerte, ¿no? Bueno, la liquidez en los mercados internacionales ya vimos que fue inexistente. En el mercado local es mucho más pronunciado, el mercado local es muy superficial y claramente no llega a ser suficiente para todas las necesidades de financiamiento. Tanto el mercado de capitales como el sistema financiero hoy tienen un incentivo a prestar al sector privado no financiero muy bajo, negativo, y esto claramente vamos a tener que, de alguna manera, lo que estamos mirando es aquellas compañías que han podido acomodar sus planes de expansión a la inexistencia de fuentes alternativas de liquidez, y aquellas compañías, por otro lado, que tienen inventarios de rapidarización, como es el sector agropecuario, o que tienen ingresos más apoyados al sector externo o denominados en dólares, esas continúan teniendo adecuado financiamiento, básicamente en dólares, con una tasa que continúa siendo conveniente y rentable para los actuales niveles de tipo de cambio. Entonces, acá hay que hacer básicamente también una fuerte diferenciación entre compañías que tienen deuda en pesos y en dólares y los vencimientos de deuda. El riesgo de refinanciación, acá lo podemos ver más claramente, donde para las categorías más altas la deuda de corto plazo sobre la deuda total continúa siendo acotada, mientras que en las categorías de la A hacia abajo los niveles de deuda de corto plazo superan el 50%. Esa deuda hay que tener en cuenta que se actualiza a las tasas mayores en un promedio del 60% o más alto. Esto ha erosionado las coberturas de intereses en forma muy drástica en los últimos meses. Eso ha explicado básicamente todas las bajas de calificación, la mayor parte de las bajas de calificación que hemos tenido. Y bueno, digamos, el panorama de ventanas en el mercado local y en el mercado internacional continúa siendo un tema de preocupación. Con las elecciones el año próximo, esto crea obviamente mayores necesidades para el sector público. Ha habido un crowding effect muy fuerte con respecto al financiamiento, y si bien las corporaciones en Argentina tienen una amplia gimnasia en sortear crisis, la rapidez de esta y los factores enteramente macroeconómicos hacen que las compañías tengan muy poco margen de maniobra. Hasta ahora bastante manejable, no es que esperamos grandes defaults ni nada por el estilo. Ya he comentado que básicamente la perspectiva en las que hemos bajado nos sentimos confortables y sigue siendo estable. Tenemos algunas compañías en alerta negativa, en rating watch negativo, pero eso obedece más a razones legales y reputacionales relacionados con los casos de corrupción. Así que bueno, tenemos un panorama muy amplio de preocupaciones, pero básicamente las preocupaciones básicamente en temas macroeconómicos y el entorno operacional, en hacer las reformas, cuánto vamos a poder sostener las reformas en los sectores de infraestructura y en energía, si el gobierno continúa haciendo los deberes en materia fiscales, esas expectativas en el plano eléctrico va a poder sostenerse. También entendemos que hay un deberes por hacer en materia de corporate governance y de reforzar todos los planes y la transparencia en las compañías, los movimientos los movimientos entre compañías, los préstamos entre compañías, la política financiera y la transparencia en la ejecución a través de los años. El tipo de cambio es una cuestión que al momento pareciera que el temblor ha frenado, y esto ha dejado en muy buena posición a varios sectores. En la medida en que no haya un traspaso de inflación y no haya más presión de costos, las industrias se van a poder acomodar a este nuevo contexto. Y finalmente el último riesgo, no menos importante, es lo que suceda con los vecinos y con no tan vecinos en China, pero fundamentalmente en Brasil. Esto puede ser un factor positivo en cuanto a competitividad y crecimiento como uno de los mayores socios comerciales, ¿no?, de Argentina. Bueno, con esto he dado un panorama general de dónde estamos qué es lo que estamos haciendo y qué estamos reflejando en las calificaciones.
Gracias, Cecilia. Tenemos algunos minutos para preguntas. Entonces, para preguntas. Y si alguien tiene alguna pregunta. ¿No se atreve? Ah, ya, ahí atrás.
Ya no. Es para Dan tal vez la pregunta o puede ser también para ambos. ¿Qué escenario imaginamos que va a hacer Bolsonaro, si es que lo tenemos, digo, respecto al Mercosur? Gracias.
So the question is, what would we expect from Bolsonaro with respect to Mercosur? Sur or sur, depending.
I think, I don't know if you think
No, I think with regards to trade and business, I think he's very focused. Very focused on one, reforming pensions, two, privatization, which are very pro-form and also pro-trade. So I think it would be I don't think Bolsonaro necessarily would lead to, if that's the question really, regarding trade, I don't think it would be, it's not a negative for trade. I think it's more of a pro-reform, really change, from less government and more private sector involvement in privatizing. I think he wants to privatize 149 businesses, government-owned businesses. So I think from that perspective, it's more of a pro-business culture in trade.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Of course I have one. So I have one. Let's start with Dan. So, a lot of companies in Latin America, you went country by country, but a lot of the companies we rate now you wouldn't say are necessarily a Mexican company or a Brazilian company. So names that come to mind might be Vale, América Móvil, even Cemex. If you look at the EBITDA, it's not so concentrated in Mexico. And then, here in Brazil, we have Arcos Dourados, Tech Petrol, and then companies we don't rate, but Mercado Libre, Despegar.com. So these are sort of multi-Latinos. And I'm just wondering, from a credit rating perspective, how Fitch approaches the ratings on these kinds of companies.
Well, when they're multi-Latino or global entities, we view them, I would say there are certain constraints that we would, and more flexibility that these entities would have, particularly, for example, in Arcos Dourados, which is headquartered here in Argentina. But most of its earnings are from outside of Argentina. So for that company, they have a lot more in terms of funding options. They can fund in the Brazilian local market. They can do cross-border funding. They have, they earn in pesos, reais, pesos. So their diversification will allow them to be, from a rating perspective, rated higher than Argentina, because their risks are lower, because they're generating cash. So they have Brazilian risk, they have Colombian risk, they have Mexican risk. They're more of a Brazilian company than they are an Argentine company. And we do have quite a few of those companies as well. Vale is a little bit different. It's a global miner, but one of the biggest in the world. It serves about 30% of the seaborne iron ore. And it compares with you can actually compare it to a Rio Tinto or a BHP. So it is that big, that strong, and it dominates the market. So those companies are different, and their risk profiles are definitely lower because they don't have this the potential for capital controls. If Argentina imposes something on Arcos Dorados, for example, they have other markets where they can convert and pay their dollar debt. So for a cross-border obligation, they have more flexibility in terms of currency, in terms of diversification of operations. So we do view those differently.
Great, thanks. Yes.
You mentioned twice that Argentine default rates in 2019 is not a chance. But what about 2020?
Well, it's a chance. I don't think I think our rating is a B, stable, for the sovereign. And I would say that you would say investment grade is low risk. I don't know, medium is a bad word for a double B. There was a person that said something a long, long time ago that, and this is not Fitch's official definitions, but if you're investment grade, you're going to get paid. Double B, you'll probably get paid. B, you may or may not get paid. So and the way we actually define it, I'll refer you to our website, fitch.com, but it's very high speculative grade. So it's very high risk. I think with the IMF package, I think it lowers very near-term risks, because you basically have $19 billion to effectively meet your shortfall and maturities over, and there are certain things the government has agreed to cut. I think to regain confidence and to stabilize the peso and allow rates to come down, I think there needs to be time and there has to be confidence recreated that the reforms are going forward and that the government will be able to get through this. I think that's key. But I would never say, I have seen Bs go straight to default before. So there is a risk, but I think short term with the financing provided by the IMF, it looks to be fairly helpful to get through 19.
What about 2020?
It becomes a little more foggy there, doesn't it? I wish I had a perfect crystal ball for you. It depends on a lot of things. What progress the country has made in achieving fiscal, I guess, not a balance, but a primary, I guess we're not shooting for a primary surplus, but even getting from 2.6% to 0 by next year. That's going to be hard to do in an election year. And then you have politics that are going to play into it, and what happens to the government and the appetite for, further austerity, and what things can some of the things that, Argentina scores very weakly on or poorly on, institutions, labor rigidity, all of those things. I mean, what sort of movement can actually be done in that year? It's going to be hard to do, and I think beyond 2019, we'll see what happens over the next 12 to 18 months and what can be accomplished and where the mood is and where that takes us in 2020. So I think there's a lot of short-term risk, and there's some liquidity provided by IMF, but there's still a lot of risk here. Whenever you have the peso devalues, in the last, when did it start devaluing? You were like 14, now it's 40. So that was almost, see, I go back when Menem was in power, and you had the dollar pegged 1 to 1, and it went 3 to 1, and then you defaulted two years later. And you went through, I don't know how many presidents. But there was no leadership for several years. I think there were four presidents in a period of 18 months. So I've seen that. Let's hope it doesn't repeat. Can only hope.
We have time for one more question. Maybe I'll ask a slightly selfish question. Probably Cecilia. So from outside of Argentina.
En español, por favor.
En español.
Necesito practicar.
No. Entonces, afuera de Argentina hay mucha preocupación con el riesgo regulatorio con CAMESA. Y específicamente hay varias emisiones, Stoneway, Albanesi, MSU, y ellos emitieron en dólares y están dependiendo mucho de los pagos de CAMESA en dólares. Y ahora el dólar es mucho más caro aquí. Entonces la preocupación que tienen los inversionistas afuera es si realmente va a poder pagar esas obligaciones CAMESA.
Bueno, hasta ahora lo que podemos ver es el comportamiento a través de la volatilidad. Hasta ahora, a partir desde abril, que empezó la volatilidad del tipo de cambio y estos cuestionamientos empezaron a sonar más fuerte, CAMESA se han hecho los ajustes en los precios tal como estaban estipulados. El gobierno tomó medidas, de hecho, como a través de los distintos planes con el FMI, tomó medidas como para cumplir las metas fiscales, aún considerando la reducción en los subsidios. Con lo cual entendemos que lo que se puede interpretar de ahí es que están tomando todas las medidas necesarias como para no romper las reglas que se han planteado. Y entendemos que son sectores estratégicos y fundamentales para plantear el crecimiento y para plantear otras reformas en otros sectores que van a llevar el sendero virtuoso. Y por tanto, los incentivos y el esfuerzo que está haciendo el gobierno para no cambiar las reglas de juego continúan siendo importantes.
Gracias. Do we have one more question from anyone? I don't think so. All right, with that, I thank all of you for joining us today and for taking time out of your morning. Thank you to Dan and to Cecilia, our panelists. Thanks to my colleagues at Fitch again for organizing this, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.